The airport was busy that morning. Travelers rushed from one gate to another, their rolling bags making a constant sound on the floor. Among them walked a man named Adrian. He looked calm, carrying only a slim black bag. He wore a simple dark suit, nothing too flashy, but there was a quiet strength in the way he moved. Few people noticed him, yet those who looked closer could sense something about him. He was not an ordinary traveler. Adrian was the head of a growing company that had changed many industries. He had built it from nothing, working late nights and making bold choices. People in business circles respected him as a sharp leader, but to the crowd at the airport, he was just another passenger waiting for a flight. Adrian liked it that way. He never felt the need to show off his success. The flight was long, and he had been given a seat in the VIP section. It was not just about comfort, he needed the peace and space to work during the journey. Adrian believed in using time wisely, and even on a plane, he would think about new ideas, new plans, and better ways to lead his people. When he reached the gate, the crew smiled politely as they checked his ticket. He gave them a short nod and stepped inside. The plane was clean, with soft lighting and quiet music. Adrian placed his bag carefully in the overhead bin and sat in his assigned VIP seat near the window. He opened a small notebook and began to write a few thoughts. Numbers, sketches, and lines filled the page. He liked to think on paper before turning to screens. The engines started to hum, and passengers kept boarding. Then something unusual happened. A crew member walked toward him with a tense expression. Her smile seemed forced, and her voice was polite but nervous. "Sir, would you mind moving to another seat?" she asked softly. Adrian looked up, confused. "This is my seat. It's written here," he said, pointing at his ticket. "Yes, of course, but we have a special request. One of our other guests would like this seat. We would be grateful if you could move to a different one." Adrian raised his eyebrows. He had traveled many times, but never had he been asked to leave a seat he had paid for and been assigned. He remained calm. "Is the other seat also in VIP?" The crew member hesitated. "Not exactly, sir. It is comfortable, but not in this section." Adrian closed his notebook slowly. Around them, a few passengers had started watching. He felt their curious eyes, but he kept his voice steady. "I don't understand. Why should I leave my seat for someone else?" The crew member did not answer directly. Instead, she gave a nervous smile and said, "It would help us very much." At that moment, another passenger entered the VIP area. He walked with the air of someone who expected attention. The man glanced at Adrian, then at the crew, and gave a small nod as if things were already settled. It was clear that he was the reason Adrian was being asked to move. Adrian stayed silent for a few seconds. He thought about the many times in his life when people had underestimated him, when they had judged him before knowing who he was. This was not new to him. What mattered was how he chose to respond. Finally, he stood up. His face showed no anger, only calm control. "Very well," he said. "If this is what you ask, I will move." The crew seemed relieved, almost too relieved. Adrian picked up his bag and followed her out of the VIP section. He was led to a seat farther back. It was smaller, the noise of the engines louder, and the space tighter. But Adrian sat down without complaint. Other passengers whispered among themselves, surprised that a man who clearly carried himself with quiet power had been moved so easily. Some thought he looked like an executive. Others guessed he was just a quiet professional. No one knew the truth yet. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Adrian leaned back. His eyes looked out the small window, but his mind was far away. He was not angry. Instead, he was thinking carefully. He always believed that every situation, even unfair ones, revealed something important about people. This moment, he knew, would not end here. The story was only beginning. The plane lifted into the sky, its engines roaring softly as the ground disappeared below. Adrian sat in the smaller seat, his notebook closed on his lap. He leaned back and let the vibration of the plane steady his thoughts. Around him, other passengers talked quietly or scrolled on their devices. A few still looked his way, remembering how he had been moved from the VIP section. Adrian did not mind being watched. He had learned long ago that silence was often more powerful than loud words. When people underestimated him, he let them. In business, he had used that same advantage. Many rivals had thought he was too quiet to win, only to find themselves defeated when he revealed his strength. Now, he observed the crew moving through the aisles. They smiled brightly at the passenger who had taken his seat in the VIP section. That man sat tall, enjoying the attention, sipping juice as if he owned the place. The crew checked on him more than once, adjusting his blanket, asking if he needed anything. Adrian noticed all of this without a change in his expression. He was not angry, but he was not blind. Time passed, and the plane settled into its long journey. Adrian finally opened his notebook again. He began sketching out new plans for his company's next project. The hum of the engines became background music to his thoughts. He wrote about new branches, new markets, and new ways to train his people. His company, though young, had grown quickly because he believed in investing in his team. To him, leadership was not about power, it was about respect. After some hours, a small turbulence shook the cabin. The lights flickered, and the crew hurried to secure everything. Adrian calmly closed his notebook and fastened his belt. The crew moved about, asking passengers to stay seated. But as Adrian watched, he noticed something. The crew seemed more focused on the man in the VIP seat than on the rest of the passengers. Adrian shook his head slightly. He believed service should be fair to all, not only to those who demanded it. Later, as dinner was served, the crew brought trays row by row. When they reached Adrian, the steward placed a meal in front of him but without the polite tone they used with others. "Here," the steward said quickly, then moved on. Adrian glanced at the tray. The meal was fine, but he could see the difference in treatment. He quietly ate, each bite slow and thoughtful. He did not complain. Instead, he kept watching, noting every detail. A woman sitting next to him leaned closer and whispered, "You were in the VIP section earlier, right? Why did they move you?" Adrian smiled politely. "They had another plan," he answered simply. The woman frowned. "That wasn't right. You looked like you belonged there more than that man." Adrian did not reply. He simply nodded and returned to his meal. But inside, he felt the truth of her words. Belonging had nothing to do with appearances. True belonging came from what a person carried inside their work, their character, their choices. Hours passed, and the plane grew quiet as lights dimmed. Passengers slept, but Adrian stayed awake, thinking. He remembered his employees waiting for him back at the office. They trusted him, depended on him. He thought of the projects in progress, the partnerships being built, and the young people in his company who looked up to him as a mentor. He knew one thing clearly: the way he handled this unfairness would echo later. If he reacted with anger, it would only add to the noise of the world. But if he reacted with calm strength, he would show an example his team could learn from. As the night deepened, one of the junior crew members passed by. She glanced at Adrian, hesitated, then quietly whispered, "I'm sorry about earlier." Adrian looked at her, surprised. She looked nervous but sincere. "You don't need to apologize," he said kindly. Her eyes lowered. "It wasn't fair. But orders came from above. We couldn't say no." Then she quickly walked away. Adrian sat back, thoughtful. So, it had not been her choice. It was a decision made by the crew as a whole, or perhaps by one senior member. This piece of information settled in his mind like a puzzle piece. He closed his eyes at last and rested. He knew patience was not weakness. Patience was preparation. When the plane finally began its descent many hours later, Adrian sat straight, ready. The crew busied themselves, making final checks. The man in the VIP seat yawned and stretched, expecting to leave first. But Adrian's calm eyes told a different story. He had already decided what he would do once they landed. It would not be loud, it would not be messy, but it would be final. The story of that unfair exchange was not over. It was only waiting for the right stage. The plane touched down with a soft thud, the wheels rolling smoothly on the runway. Passengers clapped lightly, a habit some kept after long flights. Adrian stayed still, his eyes calm as always. He watched as the crew prepared the exit. The man who had taken his seat in the VIP section stretched once more, ready to walk out first, while the crew fussed around him as if he were royalty. Adrian did not move quickly. He believed in letting moments unfold at their own pace. Instead, he reached for his notebook and closed it, sliding it back into his slim black bag. His movements were steady, unhurried. Soon, the doors opened, and passengers began to leave. The VIP man walked out proudly, his nose slightly in the air. The crew smiled widely at him, their faces showing a respect that Adrian knew was not earned but demanded. After he was gone, the crew turned their attention back to the rest of the passengers, their smiles less bright now. Adrian stood and walked toward the exit. The same crew member who had asked him to move earlier gave him only a short nod. She did not look him in the eye. He walked past her without a word. Inside the airport, people hurried in many directions, pulling bags, calling on phones, rushing to catch connections. Adrian moved with quiet steps, but every step carried weight. He did not look left or right. His mind was already clear. He reached a private lounge where a driver was waiting for him. The driver bowed slightly and took his bag. "Welcome back, sir," the driver said respectfully. Adrian gave a small smile and followed. Outside the airport, a sleek black car stood ready. The driver opened the door, and Adrian sat inside. Once the car began moving, Adrian took out his phone. He dialed a number, and soon a voice answered. "Good morning, Mr. Adrian," the voice said. "Morning," Adrian replied calmly. "Send a message to the airline management. I want to meet with them today." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Today, sir? You just landed?" "Yes, today," Adrian said. His tone was quiet but firm. "Make it happen." "Understood." Adrian ended the call and leaned back. The city passed by outside his window, tall glass towers shining in the sun. To him, those towers were not just buildings. Many of them carried his company's touch software inside their systems, designs from his team, or services built under his leadership. He had worked too hard and too long to accept disrespect quietly. Not because of pride, but because he believed fairness mattered. By afternoon, the meeting was arranged. Adrian walked into a high office building where the airline's main headquarters stood. Inside, a group of senior managers waited nervously in a glass-walled conference room. They had been told who was coming, and they knew his reputation. Adrian was not just any businessman. He was a leader whose company held contracts with many global partners, some even with airlines. When he entered, the room went silent. His steps were soft, but they filled the space with authority. The managers stood quickly and greeted him. Adrian gave a polite nod and sat down. "I had an interesting flight," he began, his voice calm. The managers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them cleared his throat. "We heard there was a situation. We want to apologize." If Adrian lifted a hand slightly, and the man stopped speaking. "I do not need apologies. I want answers. Why was I asked to leave my seat? The managers looked even more nervous. One of them tried to explain. Sir, our crew said another guest requested that seat. They thought wrong, Adrian interrupted gently. His eyes were steady. That seat was mine. I paid for it. I was moved without reason. That is not how you treat any passenger, let alone one of your partners. The room grew heavy with silence. The managers could feel the weight of his words. Adrian leaned forward slightly. Do you know what leadership means? He asked. No one answered. It means fairness. It means treating every person with respect, no matter their face, their clothes, or their name. Your crew failed in that. They failed your airline, and they failed themselves. The managers shifted uncomfortably. One tried to defend the crew. Perhaps they were under pressure. Perhaps Adrian's voice grew colder, though still quiet. Pressure does not excuse disrespect. He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he added, your crew is your image. When they act wrongly, the whole company pays the price. No one dared to speak. Adrian's eyes moved from one manager to another. At last, he said, I will make my decision soon. Until then, I suggest you prepare. He stood up, leaving the managers frozen in their seats. His presence lingered even after he left the room. Outside, Adrian walked calmly to his car. His driver opened the door, and Adrian sat down once more. The city lights were starting to glow as evening fell. Adrian looked out the window, deep in thought. He had not yet shown his full hand. The airline thought the matter was only about one unfair seat. They did not yet realize the depth of the storm he could bring. Adrian smiled faintly to himself. The crew who had treated him unfairly had no idea who he truly was. But soon, they would. The following morning, sunlight filled Adrian's office through tall glass windows. The city below was already busy, cars moving like streams of metal, people rushing to work. Adrian stood near the window, his hands behind his back. His office was large but simple, decorated with only what was needed. He believed clarity in space helped clarity in thought. On his desk lay a file. Inside were details about the airline, its contracts, its financial reports, its global partners. His team had prepared the file overnight. They knew their leader never wasted time once a decision was made. A knock on the door broke the silence. A young assistant entered, carrying a tablet. Sir, the managers of the airline are requesting another meeting, she said softly. Adrian turned, his face calm. Did they bring a proposal? The assistant nodded. They said they are ready to make changes if you give instructions. Adrian walked to his desk and sat. He opened the file, glancing at the numbers again. Then he spoke. Arrange the meeting here. This time, they will come to us. The assistant bowed her head and hurried out. By afternoon, the managers of the airline entered Adrian's office. Their faces were pale, their eyes careful. They had heard stories of his decisions in business, how one choice from him could raise a company to new heights or send it into decline. They knew this meeting could decide their future. Adrian welcomed them with a slight nod. Please, sit. They sat quietly, their hands folded. One manager cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Adrian, we wish to offer our apology again. The incident on the flight was unfortunate. We are ready to take action against those involved. Adrian looked at him steadily. What action? We can suspend the crew member who asked you to move. We will also warn the others. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Is that what you think will solve the problem? Punishing one person? The managers exchanged uneasy glances. Another spoke, Sir, we understand it was not fair, but mistakes happen. Adrian's eyes sharpened, though his voice stayed calm. Mistakes happen, yes. But repeated patterns of unfairness are not mistakes. They are culture. And culture comes from leadership. The room fell silent. The managers shifted uncomfortably. Adrian continued, "On that flight, I was treated as if my comfort did not matter. I was moved from a seat I paid for. I was spoken to without respect. That is not just poor service. That is failure of values. If you wish to keep my support, you must do more than suspend one person. You must change the way your people think and act." His words struck hard. The managers bowed their heads, knowing he was right. Then Adrian placed the file on the table and tapped it lightly. "Your airline depends on several contracts with companies connected to mine. If I withdraw, you will lose more than you imagine." The managers stiffened, fear flashing in their eyes. They knew he had the power to end deals that brought them millions. Adrian let the silence grow before he spoke again. "But I do not seek revenge. I seek fairness. If you want to rebuild trust, start with your crew. Replace those who refuse to respect passengers. Train the rest. Show the world that your airline values dignity above all else." One manager finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Yes, sir. We will follow your direction." Adrian nodded. "Good. I expect results soon. Otherwise, I will make my own move." The meeting ended. The managers left, their steps heavy, their faces pale. They knew a storm was waiting if they failed. When the office was quiet again, Adrian sat back in his chair. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting out a slow breath. He did not enjoy threatening others, but sometimes strength was needed to create change. A knock came again. This time, it was one of his senior advisors. The advisor stepped in, carrying news. "Sir, the press has started asking questions. A few passengers from that flight spoke online about what happened. They are saying a man was unfairly removed from VIP for another passenger." Adrian opened his eyes. "Did they mention my name?" "Not yet, sir. But it may spread soon." Adrian thought for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. "Let it spread. The truth has its own way of traveling. When the time is right, they will know who that man was." The advisor nodded, then asked carefully, "Sir, do you want the crew dismissed immediately?" Adrian's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained calm. "Not yet. Let the managers struggle with their choice. The crew will know soon enough what happens when respect is lost." As evening fell, Adrian returned to the window. The city lights glowed like stars on the ground. He thought of the passengers who had watched him being moved from his seat, the whispers that had followed, the quiet apology from the young crew member. He knew this was no longer only about him. It was about showing that power should never be used to mistreat others. If he stayed silent, the same thing would happen to others again and again. But Adrian was not a man who stayed silent. The next day, his decision would unfold. And when it did, the crew and the managers would understand the full meaning of leadership. Morning arrived quietly, but inside the airline headquarters, there was no peace. The managers had not slept well. They knew Adrian was watching them, and one wrong step could destroy their standing in the business world. Every phone call, every message felt heavier than usual. Meanwhile, the crew from that flight also began to feel uneasy. Whispers had spread among the staff. Some said the passenger they had asked to move was no ordinary man. Some even believed he had strong connections to leaders in several industries. The truth was still unclear to them, but fear grew with every passing hour. At Adrian's office, work continued as normal. His employees walked through the halls with energy and confidence. They trusted their leader, for he never ruled with fear. Instead, he guided with fairness. Many young workers often said they had never seen a man who combined calmness and power so perfectly. Adrian entered the main hall where his senior team had gathered. They stood as he approached, waiting for his direction. Today, Adrian said in his steady voice, the airline will learn its lesson. Prepare the documents. We will end 2 of their contracts immediately. The team exchanged glances, surprised but ready. They knew what this meant. Adrian's company held service contracts with the airline for technology and logistics. Losing those would cost the airline more than money, it would damage its reputation. Should we announce it publicly, sir? One of them asked. Not yet, Adrian replied. First, send the message directly to their leadership. Let them feel the weight before the world hears of it. The orders were carried out swiftly. Within an hour, the airline's managers received formal notice, 2 major contracts had been ended. Panic spread quickly through their offices. Phones rang non-stop, and staff ran through corridors with worried faces. The head manager called Adrian immediately. His voice trembled as he spoke. Mr. Adrian, please, give us more time. We will fix everything. We will retrain the crew. We will improve our service. Adrian listened quietly, then answered, you had your chance yesterday. But your response was too weak. You thought a simple apology would be enough. It was not. The manager's breathing grew heavy. Sir, please, if you take away all support, we will collapse. Adrian's voice stayed calm, yet sharp. Then collapse, and rebuild with better values. A company that does not respect people does not deserve to grow. The call ended, leaving silence on both sides. By afternoon, news began to spread. A few media outlets reported that a large company had cut ties with the airline. Reporters asked questions, but no one gave clear answers. Passengers who had been on the same flight added their voices online, describing what they had seen. One passenger wrote, the man they forced out of the VIP seat never raised his voice. He looked calm, but I could tell he was important. I think the airline made a mistake they will regret. Another added, I was there. The way the crew treated him was unfair. And now the news shows the airline is in trouble. Maybe that man was the reason. The story grew, though Adrian himself said nothing publicly. He preferred action over noise. That evening, the airline called an emergency meeting with the crew from the flight. The senior manager of operations stood in front of them, his face pale. Do you know who that passenger was? He asked coldly. The crew looked at one another, confused. Finally, one of them asked, who was he? The manager's voice dropped. He is Adrian, head of one of the most powerful companies in this region. Because of what happened, we have already lost 2 major contracts. If we lose more, this airline will fall. The room fell silent. The crew members stared at each other, their hearts sinking. The steward who had spoken to Adrian on the plane felt his knees weaken. He remembered the calm look on Adrian's face, the quiet way he had accepted the unfair treatment. Now he realized that silence had been more dangerous than anger. One of the younger crew members whispered, I told him sorry. I didn't know who he was, but I felt it was wrong. The manager shook his head. Sorry is not enough. Now the whole crew will face consequences. This is bigger than any of you thought. Meanwhile, Adrian sat in his office, reading a report from his advisor. The news was spreading faster now. His name had not yet been mentioned, but people were connecting the dots. He knew it would not be long before the world discovered the truth. His advisor asked carefully, Sir, do you want to reveal your role in this? Or stay silent? Adrian closed the file and looked out the window at the city night. Silence has power. But sometimes truth must be spoken. When the right moment comes, I will reveal it. Not to boast, but to teach. He turned back to his team. Prepare a statement. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. When we speak, it must not be about me. It must be about fairness and respect for all passengers. The team nodded, understanding his vision. Adrian leaned back in his chair. His calm smile returned. The crew had underestimated him, the managers had underestimated him, but now they would all see the lesson written clearly. This was not only about one man's seat on a plane. It was about the value of every human being, no matter where they sat. And Adrian was ready to make sure the world remembered it. The next day began with louder noise than before. News outlets now carried the story on their front pages. Headlines spoke of contracts lost, of passengers whispering about an important man treated unfairly, and of an airline trying to control the damage. The identity of the passenger was still not official, but many had already guessed. Inside Adrian's office, his senior team gathered again. Their faces showed quiet excitement. They had seen how quickly their leaders' calm actions shook an entire industry. But Adrian himself sat with the same steady expression. He was not celebrating. To him, this was not about victory. It was about a lesson. One of his advisors spoke first. "Sir, the airline has announced that the entire crew from that flight has been suspended. They say an investigation is starting." Adrian nodded slowly. "Suspension is easy. It is not enough. They must change the way they lead. If they only punish, then nothing will improve." Another advisor leaned forward. "The public is demanding to know who the passenger was. They are waiting for your voice." Adrian looked out the tall glass window. The morning sun painted the city in gold. He spoke softly but firmly. "Prepare a message. Today we will speak. But remember, it must not sound like pride. It must sound like truth." By afternoon, the world finally heard his words. Adrian's statement was released to the press and shared across every platform. "I was the passenger moved from my seat," the statement began. "I accepted it in silence, but silence does not mean agreement. Every passenger deserves fairness, no matter their name, their face, or their status. Leadership is not shown by favoring the loudest voice, but by respecting all voices equally." The message spread like fire. People everywhere read it and shared it. Some called him brave. Others said he had shown more power in silence than anyone could have shown in anger. The airline, however, felt the weight more than anyone. Their offices filled with phone calls, complaints, and questions from partners. Other companies began to ask if they should also end contracts with them. Confidence in the airline dropped sharply. That evening, a special press conference was arranged. The airline's managers stood before cameras, their faces tired. They admitted mistakes, apologized to the public, and promised new training programs for their crew. They even offered to meet Adrian in person to make peace. Adrian watched the conference on a large screen in his office. His team waited for his reaction. He remained calm. "Words are easy," he said. "Change is hard. We will wait and see." Meanwhile, the crew members who had been on the flight sat together in silence. The steward who had asked Adrian to leave his seat felt sick with regret. He remembered Adrian's calm eyes, the way he had stood without complaint. Now he realized that every quiet action had been filled with meaning. Another crew member whispered, "We lost everything because we failed to show respect." The younger crew member who had whispered sorry to Adrian looked down. "I knew it was wrong. If only I had spoken louder." Their fate was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they had been part of a lesson the whole world was now watching. Adrian, on the other hand, continued his work as usual. He held meetings with his teams, planned future projects, and checked progress on new ventures. For him, life did not stop because of the incident. Yet in every room he entered, people looked at him with even greater respect. They had seen how he had turned unfairness into strength. Late at night, as the city lights shone below, Adrian sat in his office alone. His notebook lay open, filled with sketches and words. He thought about leadership once more. He wrote a single line across the page: Respect is the seat no one should be asked to give up. He underlined it once and closed the notebook. The next morning, reporters waited outside his office building, hoping to catch him. When Adrian finally stepped out, dressed simply as always, they rushed forward with microphones. "Mr. Adrian, what do you want to say to the airline now?" one asked. He paused and looked at them. His voice was calm but carried weight. "I want them to remember that leadership is not about who sits in the front. It is about how you treat the one in the back." With that, he walked past them, his driver opening the car door. The cameras clicked rapidly, capturing his every move. Across the world, people replayed his words. Social platforms filled with his quote. Students discussed it in classrooms, workers repeated it in offices, and even leaders in other companies mentioned it in meetings. Adrian had turned a single unfair act into a lesson for millions. And though the airline now scrambled to recover, the truth was clear. Respect could not be bought with money or demanded by power. It had to be earned by actions, every single day. Adrian leaned back in his car seat as it moved through the streets. His face was calm, but his eyes carried quiet fire. He knew the lesson had been delivered. But the story was not yet finished. The final chapter still waited. The morning sun shone brightly over the city as Adrian prepared for the final steps of his plan. The events of the past days had already sent waves through the airline and the business world. His statement about respect and fairness had gone viral, reaching millions of people. Yet Adrian knew that words alone were not enough. True leadership required action. He gathered his senior team in the office. "Today, we close this chapter," he said calmly. "The airline must understand that respect is not optional. It is the foundation of every decision they make." His team nodded, ready for his instructions. Adrian outlined the actions carefully. First, the airline would formally meet with the crew from that flight. They would explain the consequences of their actions and offer guidance to ensure such mistakes never happened again. Second, the airline would implement a training program focused on fairness, dignity, and respect for all passengers. And finally, Adrian decided to personally acknowledge the crew members who had acted sincerely, like the young steward who had quietly apologized during the flight. By midday, the airline's senior managers arrived at Adrian's office. Their faces were tense, but they carried the courage to face the consequences. Adrian greeted them politely and motioned for them to sit. "We have received your messages," he said. "I have read your plans to correct the mistakes. I want to make one thing very clear: fairness cannot be optional. Leadership is not shown by status or wealth. It is shown by how you treat everyone equally." The managers bowed their heads, understanding the gravity of his words. Adrian paused for a moment, then added, "You will retrain your crew, and you will lead with respect from this day forward. Any future incidents of unfair treatment will not be ignored." The room was quiet. Adrian's calm voice carried more weight than any raised tone ever could. Then he turned his attention to the crew members, who were waiting in a separate room. They had been called in to meet the man who had caused such a stir. Their hearts raced as they entered Adrian's office. The steward who had spoken to Adrian on the flight lowered his eyes. He remembered the calm strength in Adrian's gaze, the way he had endured the unfair treatment without complaint. Now, face to face with him, he felt a mixture of fear and respect. Adrian spoke first. "You made a mistake on that flight. You failed to show fairness and respect. But mistakes are opportunities to learn. Some of you recognized the error and acted with sincerity. Those actions will not be forgotten." He walked slowly among them, his calm eyes meeting each crew member's gaze. "You must understand this: your behavior reflects your company and your character. Never forget that the quiet observer may have more power than the loudest passenger. Respect is not earned by authority, it is earned by actions." The crew listened, absorbing every word. One young steward, the one who had whispered sorry during the flight, felt tears rise. Adrian paused in front of him. "Your apology was noticed," he said gently. "And it matters. Keep this lesson with you always." Adrian then turned back to the managers. "Lead your people with fairness. Retrain those who failed. Reward those who showed integrity. Only then will your company regain trust." The managers nodded, visibly relieved that Adrian's decision combined justice with opportunity for growth. After the meeting, Adrian returned to his office alone. He sat by the window and looked out over the city. The events of the past week had reminded him once again why he valued fairness above all else. Leadership was not about power, money, or prestige. It was about respect and the courage to act rightly, even when others did not. His notebook lay on the desk. He opened it and wrote a single sentence: "True strength is shown in fairness, not fear." He underlined it and smiled slightly. Outside, the city moved on. People walked the streets, carried briefcases, and hurried to meetings, unaware of the quiet lesson that had unfolded in an office high above them. Adrian knew that the world would not remember the moment of unfairness on the plane, but they would remember the lesson of respect and leadership. Later that evening, Adrian walked out of his office building, his steps calm and confident. A few people passing by noticed him, but he gave only a polite nod. He had no need for attention. The change he had inspired was already spreading, quietly but surely. At home, he sat with his family, finally relaxing. He enjoyed the peace of the evening, the laughter of children, the warmth of home. Leadership, he knew, was not just for the office or the boardroom. It was in every action, in every decision, in every way one treated others. And so, the story ended not with anger or punishment, but with a lesson in dignity. The airline learned the cost of unfairness and the power of respect. The crew understood the value of integrity. And Adrian, as always, led not with pride, but with quiet strength. The seat on the plane had been just the beginning. The real impact was far greater, a lesson the world would not forget.